we will go ahead and call the meeting to order. Special meeting of the Planning Commission, Tuesday, May 30th, 6 p.m. meeting. Call to order. Mr. City Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Aliman,
Present.
Commissioner Stover,
Present.
Commissioner Wagstaff,
Present.
Vice Chair Nindell,
Present.
and Chairman Voss.
Present.
Thank you.
Commissioner Alleman, will you lead us in the pledge?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Commissioner Stover, will you lead us in a happy birthday for Commissioner Wagstaff?
Oh, am I supposed to sing it?
Oh,
Okay, okay.
we're all going to join you.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, dear Commissioner Wagstaff.
Happy birthday to you. This is on video and you're bright red, officially embarrassed. That's okay.
We are.
Yep, of course. I get it. Good cover there, buddy. Public comments. Any public comments, sir?
We have none.
Okay. Then we will move on to our public hearing item, which is recommendation to the City Council to amend various chapters of Title 17, specifically relating to unconforming uses, landscaping, and sign regulation. And I thought the way that we would handle this is we'll go over each one, vote on that one individually, make any amendments, et cetera, instead of all collectively as a package, similar to what we did last time. Mr. Community Development Director.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Just to kind of rehash the background a little bit, the city did receive a grant from HCD to help us streamline and the processing approval, especially of housing projects through our code. So we're using some of the funds to help with this Title 17 update. And while doing so, we wanted to clarify language in the chapters that's ambiguous or contradictory, make sure there's consistency internally across all chapters, and also consistency with the general plan. So tonight we're looking at 3 chapters: nonconforming structures and uses, sign regulations, and landscaping standards. We did advertise outdoor advertising displays, but that has been postponed to a later meeting. So with the first chapter, this is very simple, very minor changes were made to this chapter. So we were able to redline this for you. Basically, the big change is removing the restrictions on expansion of non-conforming residential. So we felt that our current code was too restrictive, especially with regard to a lot of the laws that the state has passed with respect to removing the barriers to more housing and streamlining housing development, so that restriction has been removed. And then we also added a non-conforming lots section. This is something we've been doing by practice, but if you have a non-conforming lot, you can still build upon it. It's just that whatever you build has to meet the current regulations and current code. So those were really the 2, I guess, substantive changes to this chapter. Everything else was minor and kind of wordsmithing. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Any commissioners have any comments on the non-conforming use section? The only question I had was in the non-conforming use, it said there were 2 things. Non-conforming use occupied residential expired in 15 years. Non-conforming use occupied commercial expired in 10 years. Is there a process in there that allows them to reapply to continue that?
Not at this time.
Okay.
What you're referring to is an abatement schedule for non-conforming uses so that they don't continue in perpetuity. They are out many years. A non-conforming use doesn't occupy a structure. That's 5 years. That's something that's more or less than a vacant lot.
Right.
Nonconforming structure within any residential land use, that's 15 years, so that's pretty far out. And then nonconforming use of a conforming structure within a commercial, industrial land, 10 years. So
Yeah.
typically, this would become more of a code compliance issue once we reach the end of that abatement period.
Okay. Because both of them said it was occupied, so I'm assuming that if it's a multifamily that was zoned back into an R1 and it's a fourplex, that after 15 years, they would be forced to make it a single-family home?
I think we were going to have to consult state law on that, specifically if that would be allowed in such a case.
I'm just kind of saying if we don't have, what happens to the person that's in a non-conforming use location, but they're fine? There's no code violations, there's no code enforcement issue, there's nothing going on. It just happens to be that in a general plan amendment, we made certain changes, it flips it over to that, and now they're not, legal non-conforming in the sense that if there's no issues, what would we do to say, hey, you know what, if you just reapply, it goes through planning commission or what have you, to see if it's okay?
So normally, first of all, I've been here, about 12 years now. It has never happened during my tenure so far. But if a use or a structure did in fact become non-conforming, there's no issues. I don't believe, and I can't speak for all of staff or all the city, but for the most part, we don't go out and try to look for those kinds of issues and say, hey, this is legal non-conforming. You've gotten the benefit of your burden. Now you need to change your structure. I've never seen something like that happen. Theoretically, it could. The public policy, especially for California, is that you want to get your structures into compliance, but the flip side is you have to allow the person who has the legal nonconformity the benefit of their burden. So, for example, if you're in a house, sometimes it could be 15 years or 20 years. I've seen it all the way up to 45 years for manufacturing structures, which is a lot. Could the city actually go after people? Yes, theoretically the city could. As I said, I've never seen it happen in this city. I've also represented a few cities for the past 21 years. I've never seen cities actually go out and try to get, good structures, et cetera, into conformance in that manner.
Okay.
What I have seen is, the expansion of the use has been prohibited. That I have seen.
Right, yeah, I mean.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, I remember when I worked for Palm Springs and dealt with all this, we had a whole bunch of these, especially in the Desert Highland Gateway area and some other areas. And what ended up happening is that they just simply required that you'd come back and you'd apply for a continuation of the legal non-conforming use. If you're functioning, you're good, everything's happening fine, then you do that. If it's a code violation issue, then you fall back into whatever the existing code is. But if it's not, then and there's no problems, no code violations, nothing. But now you're coming, because here's the other thing is, and this is what we found over there, was that some of these properties, when they would try to get loans,
Yeah.
that's
It's a
where
problem
the
with
problem
financing.
lied, is there wasn't that avenue for the application. So I'd like to be able to see where we can insert in here if they're legal, legal non-conforming use, they're occupied, they're not a code violation, that there's a way that they can apply for continuing the non-conforming use. It's
So
not a
the
problem.
answer is yes, we can put something like that as a suggestion from the planning commission, if the planning commission votes on that, to include that. I would probably put it in 17.124.050. I would have to kind of look to see if that was the best place, but basically what I'm hearing is the continuance of the legal non-conforming use so long as no other code violations or notices of abatement or anything like that.
Correct.
Just a clarification, you're talking about residential, non-conforming residential in a residential district and not commercial or industrial in a residential
I
district.
don't see why
Everything.
commercial and industrial would be a problem either. I mean, it's 10 years. If we have a business that's there, that's been doing their thing, and they're there continuing their, doing their business, nothing's happening. And let's say the guy says, hey, I need to get a business loan now. Oh, well, you only got 2 more years, or you're not even, because of the zoning or what have you. Again, I look at it as if they're there, they're occupied, they're not causing any issues, there's no code violations, there's none of these things, why wouldn't we want to have an avenue that they could come back and apply and kind of say, hey, you're good, here's another 10 years kind of thing.
So long as there's no expansion, correct? So
Right,
just the
right. It's
exact same
existing
thing,
use,
just
they're not
existing.
building on it, they're not doubling the size, then they have to conform to whatever the standard of regular codes are. But I'm talking about the steel iron guy that makes iron gates, that's been there for however many years, but now the zoning's changed. He's technically in this legal non-conforming use aspect of it, but if there's no code violation, why couldn't they continue doing what they're doing?
So again, to answer the question, absolutely they could, and I would suggest that we would either, again, amend that 17.124.050, but I will figure out where to put it.
Okay.
If that's the direction the planning commission would like to go as a recommendation to council.
Are there any additional comments on the non-conforming use or any comments on what I suggested? We're good? If not, we'll,
I like what you suggested.
okay. If we don't have any, then let's go ahead and take a motion to approve the non-conforming structure section with this amendment to it.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, if I may just interrupt, this is a public hearing. I only see one person in the audience. Would you like to speak on this one item? So we could deem it open and closed, and then go ahead and make your motion.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and close the hearing, and then now we'll make the motion. Do we have somebody who wants to make a motion, or I'll make?
I'll make the motion.
Okay,
Let's see, what's the number on this one? I would move that we recommend to the city council amending chapter 17.124 non-conforming structures and uses with one modification to include an insertion of the continuation of the non-conforming use if all other things about the property are compliant with code. That's the motion.
okay. We have a second?
I'll second.
All right. Mr. City Clerk, do you not just do a roll call, or do you want us to use this little thing?
We can do a voice vote.
Okay?
All in favor?
But you're going to call our names.
No, that's a roll call vote. So voice vote would just be like
Okay.
all in favor.
All right, all right.
Okay, aye.
Any opposed?
Yes.
Opposed?
So
All
motion
right.
passes unanimously.
Passes. We will now reopen the public hearing, and we will discuss landscaping standards.
Signs.
Signs? Yeah, we'll do the signs next.
Good evening, Chair and members of the commission. So staff has done essentially a complete rewrite of Chapter 17.44, sign regulations. To summarize the changes, I'll go through some of the relevant highlights. The main purpose of the rewrite was to focus on creating and maintaining a message-neutral policy. This was done to ensure that our code is aligned with First Amendment rights for processing and reviewing sign applications. So an example of this is in our temporary sign section, we removed language referencing a grand opening sign and now just refer to this type of sign as a banner, disregarding the message on the sign. Therefore, any kind of banner, regardless of the message, is intended to be a temporary sign, which would be regulated with a temporary sign permit. We simplified the table of contents, reducing it from 19 sections in our current code to 13 sections in the proposed rewrite, with the intent to be user-friendly by combining, removing, and reorganizing sections. An example of this is that our current code has 3 sections for design guidelines, while the proposed code only has 1 with added illustrations for usability. In our procedures and permit requirements section, we maintained our current code's sign program language, so sign programs will still go to the Planning Commission. However, we did increase the requirement to impact properties with 3 or more tenants, whereas the previous code required a sign program for 2 or more tenants. Sign programs are not retroactive and apply to new construction or development, and revisions to sign programs are reviewed by the Community Development Director. In this section, we also added language for discretionary review for project-specific or creative exceptions, which would be reviewed by the Community Development Director, subject to findings. We added an updated table to our permitted sign section. We used the structure of our current sign regulation table with updates removing content-based language and an emphasis on the use of monument and wall signs. That concludes the highlights for Chapter 17.44. I'm available for any questions.
All right. Any questions of staff of the sign regulations?
What was the reason for going from 2 to 3 tenants?
So a sign program requires a public hearing, and the cost of a sign program is $2,210. And it's a pretty lengthy process. We have a lot of applicants developing a QSR and a gas station, and we feel it'd be burdensome to development for just 2 tenants.
Any others?
I have a question for the city attorney. I did a word search through all of this language looking for the word profanity or profane, and that's my question.
Yeah.
Okay, what happens if businesses across the U.S. are often now using signs to make political statements? And how will the city prevent profanity in these sounds?
So I would highly recommend that the city does not prevent any kind of abridgment of speech in that fashion. Profanity is protected speech. What is not protected is obscenity. And that, of course, came from the 1960s, 1970s, where obscenity is, hey, you'll see it, I know it when I see it. Profanity, on the other hand, is in fact protected. It's not protected when coupled with other speech that is also not protected. I'll give you an example. Inciting a riot, yelling fire in a crowded theater. That kind of speech is not protected speech. Inciting a riot is something that is actually criminal in nature, and if you start using profanity while also inciting a riot, but this is the level of speech we're talking about, then profanity would be considered unprotected speech. Profanity by itself is protected. Signs and speech are the bane of most city attorneys' existence. It is very complicated. It's the First Amendment. Many people don't like it when I say, hey, if you want, you can have a sign in front of your house saying, hey, I love McDonald's. Is that commercial speech? It could be, but so is I love the Dodgers, or I love, the Angels, or pick your sport. So what we're really trying to do with this sign code is to not regulate content-based signs or content-based speech. Cities are allowed to regulate the time, the place, and the manner of signs. So where it could be located, how big it is, whether or not could it be illuminated, how many signs you could have on a property, whether or not it's a monument sign or a pole sign, that kind of thing. Speech, on the other hand, I highly, highly do not recommend regulating speech, including profanity. And I wish I could tell you differently, but legally I cannot.
I wish you could too.
Yes, and I get it.
But are you saying then that if a sign can have the F word in it, but
That
it
is
can't
correct.
say F the police?
A sign can say F the police, unless it's inciting a riot. I forgot the name of the case, I actually looked at it today. But basically, I think Justice, whoever it was, specifically stated something like, somebody's profanity is another person's lyrics, and I forget who it was. It could have been Justice Berger. I don't know, get it wrong. But profanity is protected.
Yeah.
I understand, and I say this and I get the looks but once you start, I think from this 1960s, the 1970s, the courts were thinking, once we start regulating profanity, what else is next? Because there's a real slippery slope from there. So I'm sorry for the bad legal news or the good legal news. Take it as you wish, but profanity is not in this code.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions?
Personally, I love that we're not policing speech. I think that that's not our business, and I commend you for writing it in that manner. And actually, I thought it was very thorough and well-written, and so I want to also commend the staff on doing a good job. My one concern with this code is with the A-frame signs. I see that they're allowed for every store, and I know we discussed this in the meeting, but just to get it on the record. And if they're allowed for every store and we have a standard dimensions and the way that they're secured to the pavement, I'd just like to see them put into the list of exempt signs so there's not a fee associated with something that it should be just a right of our business people. So that would be my concern.
Okay. And how does that read for us now? Do we know off the top of our head?
Yeah, so currently it's required to have a temporary sign permit, and we can remove it from that and put it into the exempt permit section.
Okay. Let's see, were there any other comments? I think there was just the one in regarding sign programs. That's pretty new for our town now, I think. Isn't it, we have like one or two?
Yeah, we have one.
Okay. All right, so, if a place, and I think one of the things to, for other commissioners to realize too, that a lot of these signs, when they're put up, they have to do wind calcs, they have to do the thing regarding the sun and these things. So there's some of those limitations that can be had, but you can have individual signs on pretty much any other type of business as long as it fits within what we're looking for in the code and isn't a hazard. That's what it sounds like from what we read. Okay, so we will now open the public hearing and we'll take any public testimony. Do we have any public testimony on the sign code? Going once, going twice, we do not. We will close the public hearing. And Planning Commission recommendation. We'll look for a motion, and if not, does anybody have any issues or concerns regarding the amendment to this by placing the A-frame sign into the exempt file? Don't have any? All right, then let's go ahead and make a motion.
I move that we accept the recommendations to the City Council amending Chapter 17.44, sign regulations, with the one amendment to move A-frame signs into the exempt from fee column.
Okay.
Second.
All right, motion and a second. Mr. City Clerk? We'll do a voice one?
Sure, I can do it. All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Gerald, you should know I'm real big on formality, brother. All right, let's go ahead now with landscaping.
So, Mr. Chairman, this was a major rewrite, but more of a restructuring of the existing chapter. For example, we retained the design guidelines, but moved them up in the chapter so they're a little bit more prominent instead of at the end of the chapter. One of the major change was delineating which requirements apply to single-family and small-scale multifamily versus non-residential and larger multifamily. The way the code was written, it was unclear, and it looked like that single-family had a lot more requirements than would be necessary for a single-family lot. The other thing we did is we incorporated the option to use the pre-approved landscape plans provided by MSWD. This is something we're currently doing, when we get an application for a single-family house, and so this just sort of formalizes it. Homeowners would have the option to do their custom plan, and, provided it met the requirements, that would be an alternative. Kind of the big change here is a table for minimum landscape area. We did not have this before, so there is a table for what would really be at absolute minimum, and I know the percentages are low, but we looked at existing development throughout the city, kind of derive those percentages, and an example being industrial there, the percentage is 5%. But if you looked at some of the developments that have been approved recently, such as Black Star or Merge or Desert Gateway, they work out to be 5%. And that's just the landscape area. That doesn't include retention area or other impervious surface that would be on the lot. So that was one of the more substantial changes. We also added a little bit more detail to the parking lot landscaping requirements. We took a look at what Palm Desert did and also asked other landscape architects in the area which code they like working with, and we thought Palm Desert has some good ideas for landscaping parking lots. Another minor thing that we added was situations where applicant may choose to put solar or covered parking over the parking in lieu of landscaping, so we've got provisions in that as well. So those were the major changes, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we will go ahead and, do any commissioners have any questions or comments of staff? Okay,
I don't know, this is my,
this is your opportunity.
moment. Okay.
This is your moment.
all right, so, first of all, again, I'd like to commend the staff on a really good job in updating this. I like the direction that it's going. But in the spirit of conserving water and discouraging the use of invasive plants and mitigating the heat island effect, I've submitted this email, which is just a very rough draft of an idea that I'd like to see incorporated in the plan to help address those issues. You've all got a copy of it. I don't need to read it, but basically, or unless you want me to, but basically it's, I looked at Los Angeles landscaping, and that's where I got this sort of idea of doing a menu of pick 4 out of the 10 criteria to be approved. And so that's where that list is sort of modified from. I've made it a little bit simpler. In discussion with the city engineer, some of my ideas on water harvesting in the landscape to meet 50% of the landscape need may not be a realistic projection because our rainfall is about half of what Tucson is, so that would need to be changed to a lower number. I'm flexible on all these numbers. This is just an idea that I'm spitballing, and I'd like to see us moving in a direction of using our rainfall in landscape in situ as opposed to trying to move it off-site. The more we pave, the more floodwater, stormwater runoff we're going to see. So I think that's what I'm trying to address here, in addition to creating more shade and cooler surfaces, etc. So I guess if anybody has any questions, if you've had a chance to read this, or, I don't know, discussion, I don't know.
Okay. Why don't we go ahead and open the public hearing and see what we get from that. We'll close it, and then we can kind of have a little further discussion on this item. So we'll go ahead and we'll open the public hearing. Are there any public testimony from anybody in the public? Anybody wishing to talk? I can see that the two in the audience are pushing and shoving and running to come up here. Appreciate your attendance, by the way. Thank you both for coming here. Okay, if seeing that we have none, then we'll go ahead and we'll close the public hearing, and then we'll have planning commission discussion on this. I got this, perused it for about 3 or 4 minutes. I did not have a time to really digest a whole lot of it, unfortunately, because today's a rather busy workday. On this, did any other commissioners have any comments or get a chance to read this at all, or?
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to read it at all. I was just yourself busy today, skimming through it now.
I think that my goal in this is not so much that we say, oh, yay, Mary Kate, you did a great job, or whatever, but that this is an issue that needs a little bit more detailed thought and possibly to be continued. And so my thought was initially that this might be something that I might consider moving to continue for further in-depth discussion and also refinement by the staff.
So what I'm thinking is we can go ahead and vote on the landscape, what's proposed by staff, and then let's have a vote of the commission to see if they want to take this item to have it as an agenda item for further discussion.
If I may make one comment, that's actually pretty much what I was going to say. If the planning commission was so inclined to kind of move this forward to city council, kind of as is, because it cleans up a lot of what we needed to clean up. I think what Commissioner Stover has very good ideas, frankly, and those ideas can be kind of looked at a little bit more in depth. I don't think the commissioners actually had a chance to kind of review it. I did review it. But that said, we also have a timeline for our grant money as well, which everything kind of needs to be updated in Title 17. I think it's by November.
September. Yeah.
September. So if it's okay with the commission, if it's okay, to kind of move this along, bring this back with the idea that we would be looking at the landscaping, water conservation, pavement, that kind of thing, and to then, push that item then forward to the city council with that. And we can let the city council know as well, when the city council votes on these items, that the planning commission, if that's the inclination of the planning commission, will be looking at, more of the water conservation standards.
So I think on this one, though, we don't necessarily need a formal vote. It's just a matter of kind of, is this what the commission wants, or should we do it a formal vote?
So the only formal vote that would be needed is on the actual chapter 17
Correct,
point,
correct.
whatever it is. Correct. That's the only thing we can take a formal vote on,
Correct.
because it's the only thing that was agendized. But it could be kind of with the understanding that, planning commission will revisit this, and also to at least let, city council know that, this is an important item to the planning commission, is to have, take a look at our water conservation and other conservation measures.
I would argue, not to be argumentative, but I would argue that this proposed language belongs in landscaping, because the issue is that the Mission Springs Water District plant list, for example, is from 2009, almost 15 years ago, and the standard has changed since then.
I agree with you that I didn't mean to say anything different. I completely agree with you that those landscaping, the water standard should be in this landscaping chapter. So the answer is yes, it would be in this landscaping chapter, but it's almost to bifurcate it, meaning to allow it to move forward as is and then bring it back with the recommendations that you might talk about, or the planning commission has, or something like that. But you're absolutely correct. The planning commission could also continue the item wholeheartely, maybe for 2 weeks, to actually include these kinds of landscaping issues. That is also a possibility. That would be fine as well. There's definitely a possibility just to continue this piece as well, to include those. That's another way to go about it. completely up to the commission, how it would like to handle.
So my preference is that we vote on the landscaping as presented today with any minor adjustments, if any, and then let's have the commission discuss, do we want to discuss this item that's presented by a commissioner, yes or no? And if we do, then we
That would be up to the
agendize it.
commission. I would defer to the
Correct, that's
commission.
exactly what I'm going to do. Okay, so we will go ahead and take consideration if there's any other planning commission comments. Okay, then we will entertain a motion on the proposed landscaping standard changes presented by staff. Mr. City Clerk? Come on, man.
Is there a motion?
Oh, yeah.
I'll
Need
make a motion that we follow the recommendation of the city, or wait a second, sorry about that. Consideration of the planning commission to approve a recommendation to the city council amending various chapters, that would be 17.56 landscaping standards.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay,
All in favor?
all right.
Yes.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay, motion passes with Commissioner Stover opposed.
Okay. Now, in reference to the proposed topic here of different changes regarding water and efficiency and landscaping and some design stuff, and that was put into the email here that we received today, had a variety of different topics, including some structural items and what have you. What is the commission's pleasure on that?
I would move that we discuss those, the issues that I submitted at the next meeting to be created as an addendum to the landscaping that we just passed. Move to add it to the agenda for the next meeting.
I'm okay with that. Just gives you time to go over it and move to the next meeting.
Okay. Any other comments?
Mr. Chair, if I may, members of the commission, it would, maybe, I'm thinking a little off the cuff, it would be a discussion item, I would see, because the city council wouldn't even have had a chance yet to vote on the actual ordinance and to actually direct the planning commission in a fashion as to include or not include the kind of water efficient landscaping and other environmental items. So I would see it more as a discussion item, and then possibly to maybe get city council direction on that, on the landscaping portion of it. So it wouldn't be so much of an action item as a discussion item to really kind of talk about those kinds of water efficient measures and the fact that the landscaping issues are 15 years old.
Right. I just think devoid of a standard objective, or objective standard rather, if we're asking you, you may use native plants, you may use non-invasive plants, we're just going to end up with the cheapest, lowest common denominator landscapes that we can possibly get, because that's what's the bottom line for people. So if we don't have a objective standard, then, which we do, but I think we could up our game a little bit. It's time to raise the standard. It's 15 years old.
So we would be looking at, if the commission desires, we would be looking at a June 13th. Is that possible, Mr. Community Development Director?
I'd have to look at that. So there's a lot in here. I was just talking earlier. One of the things that we would definitely need to do is just define some of the terms used. So even a term like native, we would want to define, is it native to Coachella Valley or to a broader area, to California, that sort of thing. So defining all the terms that are used here would be the place to start.
We already sent out the public hearing notice for June 13th.
Yeah, I would, and we've already sent out the public hearing notice for June 13th.
So
And I would want to look at the practicality across all zoning districts as well.
Right.
And then cost of each and any unintended consequences. And I definitely want to consult MSWD, our partner in this, to make sure, Because
Right.
if we're amending or adding to the WELO, what are the practical impacts
So
of that?
why don't we do this, because I know that you had specific deadlines that were needed to be done because of the grant and that information, and then some of these others are already pre-scheduled, staff's already working on them and going. This is not required by a grant, it's not required with a deadline, but it's an added item that's at a request of a commissioner that, hey, let's entertain talking about making these changes going forward. So I don't see a sense of urgency. I see a sense of importance, but not a sense of urgency that's here. And we're already, the June 13th, they're already doing what they're doing. There is quite a bit of different things in here. Plus, in addition to, things in here that address, that I just a short time I saw it, the building department needs to be talked to, because there's certain code things in there that are related to the shade structures and percentages and what have you. And so if maybe I'm thinking that it looked like, I'm not saying that it necessarily has to be this date, but I see that, July seemed to have been a lighter month, is what I see from the master schedule that you had handed out. And so if we could have this back as a discussion item to kind of go over this thing, discuss what your findings are, fine tune it. Is there something we want, we don't want? And then you'd come back, if the commission so desires, then we'd come back with an agenda item that we would approve. It still covers what you're doing, it's just cleaning up the process without approving something that's, because right now, as it's written, I couldn't approve it. I already see some flaws in it that are going to affect building development of homes and stuff. However, some of it's good. So would that work for you?
Yeah, we can make an effort on the July meeting for sure. It's not light, it is a heavy schedule, but we'd make an effort. And I think the way I would present this is define the terms as mentioned, and laying out the pros and cons of each of the ideas, and maybe suggesting some alternatives as well.
Right, because I see at least 5 or 6 different departments that need to be spoken to about this, and then cross-reference from zoning code to building code to a few other things, which is all important items, but there's a lot of cross-reference information there, including agencies that we have no authority over either with that. Okay? Does that sound good?
I just wanted to add to staff, I would appreciate staff's help in researching this stuff. It's just an idea, and I know you guys have the expertise and the know-how to really make it right. One thing that was recommended to me by one of my friends, he's a landscape architect, because she was like, oh, if you make it, referential to Native Plant Society plant list or what have you, it's too complicated, which I hear you expressing as well. And her recommendation to me was that we create a plant list that's just like, this is our native plant list, this is our invasive, what are the invasives in the Coachella Valley? We make that list and do it as a short list so that it could be a PDF, someone could pull it offline. It doesn't have to be a hard, research project for somebody. Does that make sense?
It does, and one thing I talk with the water district is perhaps on the list that they have online, putting some kind of indicator of what is native and what's not, again, defining native, how native is native, and then invasive plants, we could probably get that from the Coachella Valley Conservation Commission, because we did have discussions with them recently on certain invasive plants. But these would all have to be defined as part of the presentation back to you.
Right, I certainly agree with that.
Right, because when I was looking at our own code, our own code currently encourages, a lot of room for individuality, but color, shade, purpose, public safety, hazards, design, how it coordinates with the building, these kind of things. So, yeah, so we'll have this sometime in July. Okay?
Sounds good.
Anything more
Do
on
we
that?
need to motion it or
Nope.
anything like that?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope, just a friendly advisal to them, now they know, give staff enough time.
Can we take a pee break?
Yeah, okay, why don't we go ahead and, let's go ahead and we'll take a 5-minute break.
Is that okay with everybody?
Sure, why not?
Okay.
Well, you know what? Never mind, I won't say what I'm gonna say, never mind.
Okay, thank you for not saying that.
all here?
Are we all back? No, Patricia is coming.
All right, we'll go ahead and we'll call this meeting back to order. We are going to go on to item number 2, discussion presentation, downtown revitalization discussion. Mr. Community Development Director.
So Gerald, could you pull up the presentation, second presentation? Okay, again, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. So this is something kind of fun, okay? We're going to break away from our ordinance rewrites and discussion there and talk about something a little bit more fun here. This is really just intended to get ideas, flowing and discussion started about the downtown. You've seen some activity lately, and we'll be charting a path forward based on that. I wanted to give a little bit of background of some of the strategies, successful strategies that have been used in downtown revitalization, kind of a broad, high level, and then drill down to some specifics. So I'm going to start by offering you 2 quotes. And the first one is creating the there. Now this is a quote that was misconstrued that Gertrude Stein said about her home city of Oakland. And she basically was saying, she went back to her home place and found nothing she recognized, and a lot of it had been torn down or changed. So planners have taken it a little bit out of context, but now what it really has come to mean is creating that center, that heart of the community, where the community comes and gathers, a focus of activity. That's kind of what creating the there means. And so Oakland was a little bit offended by the statement that Gertrude Stein said, and so they built this statue in the center of their renovated downtown, and the statue is called There. So they got the last word, I guess, on that. The other one that inspires me pretty much every day is a quote from Daniel Burnham. He said, "Make no little plans, they have no magic to stir men's blood, and probably will not themselves be realized. So make big plans, aim high, and hope and work." And so I think when you're talking about cities in general and the orderly growth and planning of cities, but also downtown in particular, this is a good quote that I've kept in mind. Just brief comment about previous efforts, just to know that things have been going on long before some of us got here. The city did have the vortex plan for downtown. There was a lot of concerns about that plan. It found it really disruptive to the existing development. It broke the traditional street grid pattern, which is kind of sacred these days in city planning. Kind of overly complex land use districts in use, and the funding source for redevelopment, went away. So it was a plan, but it had some major drawbacks. Most recently, we had the Cal Poly student downtown concept plan. There, they looked at land use, economic development, transportation, community character, and made some recommendations in each one of those. And currently ongoing is a parking strategy study where we're looking at several different places, including downtown, but also the cannabis industry and parking requirements for that. And the outcome of that will be some suggestions for strategies to improve parking throughout the city. A lot of times, these plans are envisioned in what we call a downtown specific plan. And just briefly, what a specific plan would contain is that vision for downtown and the goals and policies to achieve that vision, the right mix of land uses, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, defining the streetscapes and the public areas, analyzing both transportation networks and utilities. Sometimes there are additional design guidelines and standards above the standards that are in the code, and economic strategy, both development and redevelopment, and an implementation plan, which helps define public investments. So the first step is really defining downtown. Where is downtown? And I think there's a historical reference, but then I think that definition may have expanded and recently. Does downtown go all the way west to Cholla, or does it stop at Cactus? How far north and south does it go? My recommendation is always to think broad. So go beyond just the commercially designated areas of downtown and think about the adjoining areas and the adjoining neighborhoods. The reason for that is it makes you more competitive in some of the grants, state grants that are available, such as the infill infrastructure grant, which is exactly what it is meant to intend, that we're going to improve the infrastructure in a place like downtown through infill development, and this fund would help pay for it. Another good strategy is creating that sense of arrival. And I know we have some landscape medians and things like that, and there are main roads. But again, you can always think bigger, such as gateway signage, gateway arch, and public art. And probably one of the best sense of arrivals that I can think of is the gas lamp quarter in San Diego, where they have the big arch across the street. You definitely know you're in that district once you pass under that arch. Another key one, kind of really a primary one, is creating that walkable, pedestrian-friendly downtown. That you really prioritize pedestrians over cars in the planning effort. That can mean calming the streets, and we saw a little bit of that here on Palm Drive, going from the 4-lane or 3-lane down to 2. But also there are many other ways. Creating that sense of safety so people feel safe coming downtown. Providing amenities like shade and places to sit to make the pedestrian experience comfortable. But don't forget about the other modes of transportation: hiking, biking, transit, and driving. And just prioritizing the pedestrian. So this is actually an example in 29 Palms, where an old alley, you can see was pretty ready before, was turned into paseo. So the entire alley was basically turned into a dedicated paseo, and it runs 3 blocks through downtown and will eventually run 5 blocks through downtown. So that's an example of sort of prioritizing the pedestrian experience. Determine appropriate land uses, and this is what we're going to get into when we start reviewing the other chapters in Title 17, including the commercial districts. So in addition to the zoning map potentially extending the downtown commercial to Cholla, you got to look at land uses also within the district. So what are appropriate, and what are appropriate downtown? Should there be drive-through establishments downtown? Personal services like nail salons and beauticians. How about tattoo parlors? One time they were kind of considered tattoo, but they're sort of now all grown up and become a lot more sophisticated, and so should those types of services take a second look. Spas and resorts allowed in downtown. Very important consideration is housing, especially over the second floor. So you start to get into kind of the mixed use component, and having people living actually downtown, even if it's on second floor above, really helps with improving the vitality. So these are things that we'll be looking at in our land use tables when we get to each of the different sections. Managing parking is always a big one. But a lot of cities, what they've done as a first step strategy is to remove any on-site / off-street parking requirement in that commercial core. So you have a lot of these old buildings. They were built before there were parking regs, a lot of times, sometimes before the city even incorporated. And they were built in that traditional storefront fashion, where everybody sort of parked diagonal on the main street and just walked into the business. To bring back some of that vitality, a lot of cities are basically removing no off-site, no off-street parking is required in these downtown commercial districts, period. And that's both for the existing structures, but also any new structures that are built. So that would also help create a little bit more of a market for the infill that we have, some of the vacant lots. But don't forget about parking. Couple that with a strategy to look at new public parking lots, whether it's the city creating a new one from scratch or parking agreement with owners in underutilized lots. We have some of those downtown. And then encouraging shared parking among businesses, especially businesses that sort of have different peaks, like services may be peaking high during the day, the midday, but then at night restaurants are generally the ones that are peaking as far as demand for parking. So look at things like that. But if an owner did want to build parking, encourage that to be to the rear and to the sides and not front facing on the streets. So some of the parking strategies. This was one suggestion from the students about having the parking sort of right in the middle of, I think this is Pearson, it was what's suggested. Not quite sure how this is going to work from an engineering standpoint. I'd want to get that kind of feedback, but it's one alternative that was suggested. Activate spaces with public art. This is a big one, and you can see we've activated a space right across the street here with this building, which has become, definitely become a landmark, I think, since it was repainted. And now with the food truck Friday nights that has happened, even more activity. But murals on blank walls is a good way to start, sculptures and statues. Kind of a lot of movements, especially downtown, is what I call participatory art. And if you've been to Palm Springs, I think it's there's a sculpture that says, P.S. Heart You. But you stand in the middle to create the I and basically complete the sentence. So I would call that participatory art. Or everybody's seeing the pictures of somebody in front of the wings, in the background, that type of thing. Kind of makes art fun. Extending the streetscapes downtown. So we have a pretty good streetscape pattern, I believe, but this is another way to denote where downtown begins is through that consistent streetscape. And that includes the paving materials, the street furniture, the landscaping. Basically, there's a consistency to the downtown area based on that streetscape. Providing incentives to increase private sector investment. So the city has started down this road recently with some of the structures which are on the code compliance list and is providing some funding in that effort. That can be supplemented with grants or loan programs. We did one of these in 29 Palms. It was a grant program, a loan program, but a matching. So the property owner had to have some skin in the game, and the city would match up to $40,000. And so the impact was actually quite dramatic. We had buildings that have been shuttered for 20, in this case, 30 years. And then that incentive was enough to sort of tip the scales and create the renovation of some of these older structures. All done historically appropriate and in character, and now new businesses are moving into those. And then kind of the last one I would mention is create that public event space. That's kind of one of the key things, and it's mentioned in our general plan about creating that public event space downtown. I think it's actually referred to, give me one second here, including a central town square with plazas, courtyards for community gathering spaces, public art, community events type of thing. So obviously it depends on how much space you have as far as what kind of events can go there. Of course, closing streets are one way to create an event space, but not all events can occur on a closed street. But some of the events include farmers market. Having a very successful weekly farmers market is a good way to draw people into your downtown. Community festival space, everything from Cinco de Mayo to Halloween and the holidays. amphitheater and stage for providing concerts, performances, or theaters, those sorts of things. Space for art shows, and I would also plug car shows as well. And then space for recreation, and that can be formal space, like a water park or something like that, or more informal, like a grass lawn for throwing the frisbee, that sort of thing. And then you can design it such that some of these spaces have the dual function. You have a grass lawn, but it also functions as an amphitheater if it's designed a certain way. So I just want to go over 4 examples of cities in the neighborhood around our size, and kind of what they've done. And again, this is just get the conversations going, conversations started, not making a recommendation or anything like that at this time. So I'll start with Cathedral City. I think they've done kind of a really good job in their downtown, although they're kind of creating this downtown from scratch. Ours downtown is a little bit more organic and a little bit older in that sense. But they do have a town square park right there in front of City Hall. Has a fountain and a splash park. It's very active, especially on the weekends when all the kids are out there in the splash park. They've got an adjoining festival lawn, a civic plaza with streetscape, and they just recently completed an amphitheater. Can't really point to that, but it's up to the upper left-hand side of your picture. You can see it's under construction here. So all of that is a pretty active space. They've also had the benefit of sort of the private sector or nonprofit sector with the nearby movie theater and playhouse. All contributes to bringing people in and what I would say really achieving a critical mass. There in the lower left, that's a shot of the amphitheater, which was recently completed. The other one I'll mention here is Palm Springs. They've just finished their downtown park pretty recently. It is adjacent, very near to a very active Main Street, which is Palm Canyon Drive. We all know about Village Fest and how many people that attracts. It's an evening event, and with that, they've kind of continued that I guess that would be westward from Palm Canyon into the area where a lot of new development is going. So more streetscapes and plazas, but recently the completion of the downtown park. Again, another amphitheater, again, another stage. In this case, they had a waterfall included, and along with, I would call it a splash park, but it's really the fountains that sort of shoot up jets of water that, again, kids can play in. And they've also incorporated kind of this natural palm grove and spring area, kind of give it a little bit more natural feeling. So a lot was packed into that park in a very small amount of space. And public art. Palm Springs has really made an effort to bring public art into the city, including Maryland, one of the most recent additions. And so that's all included as well in their downtown. The third one I'll mention is Redlands, kind of a lot like Palm Springs, in that they also have a very active Main Street, in this case State Street. Redlands has a lot more history. I mean, their building stock goes back to 1860, 1870, with a lot of the downtown buildings built in 1880, 1890. So very traditional storefront type of architecture. One of the really nice things they've done is activated a lot of the alleys that were there, and also converted them to a pedestrian focus. So you can see there the middle picture of, I believe that's Orange Alley, with all the umbrellas forming the canopy there. I'm not sure if they were the first to do it or the city in Italy was the first to do it, but there's a city in Italy that's also done this. I was like, okay, who was actually first? There is a small park there right on State Street with a small plaza and a very small stage. You're limited by what you can do there, but they have a lot of the ceremonial type of functions there. And I got expanding downtown twice, but what's interesting about Redlands and what they're doing now is back during the urban renewal days when a lot of stuff was getting torn down, they tore down about 6 square blocks of their downtown. A lot of historic structures that had a lot of value, a lot of traditional storefronts, that sort of thing. And they built a mall, enclosed shopping mall in its place. Probably thrived for a while, but then times change, consumer patterns change and things like that, and the mall just went defunct. So now what Redlands is looking at is essentially reestablishing that piece of downtown that was lost by extending State Street, I think to the west, which was covered up and torn up when they built the mall, but they're opening that back up and including commercial on the first floor and residential above. So real mixed-use type development, but also some small green spaces and public spaces. And then the last one I'll throw at you is 29 Palms, one I'm quite familiar with as far as their efforts. There it was really trying to feed on the visitor traffic for Joshua Tree National Park and pulling that traffic into downtown and creating a space for them. So one of the key linchpins was the new Joshua Tree National Park Visitor Center, which brings in those visitors downtown. So that was a key component of their plan. They also included a community center that has an indoor gym, so a lot of recreation, sports gets played there. A culinary arts kitchen with a teaching school for both the elementary as well as higher level high school students as well as community college. An outdoor plaza, outdoor stage again with plaza. They also employed kind of a shared street scenario here, or design as part of this. And a shared street is basically a street that's, can be mostly traffic during most of the time, but you can close it at certain times, and then it becomes pedestrian oriented. Now, how that's different than just closing the street is a shared street has no curb line. So it's basically paved from one end to the other. So it's quote, a shared street. So people are like, well, how do people drive that? How do they know where to drive? Well, you use a lot of street furniture and landscaping to denote what's pedestrian paths when the streets are open, but then we can pull bollards up at certain times and close other parts of the street. The paseo I mentioned and the public art also big components of it. So that's kind of my overview of the presentation. Happy to answer any questions, or you want to open it up for input, but that's some of the early ideas and early thoughts behind this. And I wanted to set this into the context of what we're doing with Title 17, so you realize how these pieces now fit together.
Any comments from commissioners?
Sure.
Okay.
I just wanted to say I really love what you guys have done here. I think it's really great, and I'm excited to see how we develop this. So I had a couple of questions, though. Excuse me. One of the things that I've heard comment in town about is extending the downtown area on Pearson East towards the top of the hill. And I don't know if that's something that's been considered as well, but there's a whole bunch of shops as we go up that east, and there's also a spa at the top of the hill. And I've just heard just in the community people saying like, oh, I wish they would extend that downtown that direction. So that's just a comment that maybe we want to explore. Oh, and also I wanted to commend the staff on what a success that the street calming has already been. I've seen so many skateboarders coming down in that bike lane on Palm, and I would call that a success already. And I've seen bicycles, and I've seen wheelchair people using it as well. So I'm all for it, and I think that's it.
So I know at the last meeting, I think it was, we asked that we come back and have the commission vote on or make a statement to the council that we'd like to have the council pursue this concept or at least begin putting it on their radar. So when can we have that?
Oh, I'm going to defer to the city attorney here. I think you could make a recommendation for consideration.
That's exactly what it was for. We were supposed to have that.
Yeah, the planning commission could definitely make a recommendation to city council to, at least consider the, different items for the downtown. I know that the city council is doing a lot of things actually specifically for the downtown. That's why, they were talking with, Cal Poly. They're looking at, possibly, there's all possibilities, having a specific plan, that kind of thing. So they're already starting to, probably well before the commission, decided to recommend to them, but they're already starting looking at the downtown area. It is on the agenda, it is a discussion item, but if you wanted to make a recommendation maybe to staff or whomever, just to maybe draft a letter to them or recommend that they look into maybe specific items, that is fine as well.
Well, I think just as the code indicates that, we're supposed to have a town square, town center thing, and it was just, the intent of it is to let the council know that the commission is recommending that they kind of float this up to the radar at the top of their list, not necessarily above police and fire and streets, but something that's important to begin implementing this thing. As we saw with this vortex thing, great idea on paper. All the funding went away back with redevelopment. Nothing ever happened to it. And it just, it's non-existent. And it will forever be non-existent. And so then what's next? And so what's next is this kind of thing. And what I hate to do is see us continue to talk about it and not have where, hey, we think this is important. We know you're kind of moving forward with some of these ideas, but before we do piecemeal stuff, let's kind of look at something in the bigger picture of what we should be doing too.
And what I could recommend if it's the desire of the planning commission is to place this back on for next time, not exactly the entire presentation, but maybe a letter or something, a letter of recommendation to the city council. I'm happy to draft something, obviously the planning commission could change it how it deems appropriate. And then if there's like an actual formal letter or resolution or something like that of the planning commission to be voted upon to the city council as just a recommendation that they look at this. And there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
Yep, that's what was requested at the last meeting.
Okay. Well, I don't have a formal resolution in front of the bodies.
Recommended to bring it back to us to do just that.
I will, what was that?
It was recommended at the last meeting to do just that.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. You got it?
So I'll get that for you formally.
Okay. Perfect. Any other commissioner stuff? Nope. All right, Mr. Community Development Director, your report?
Okay, again, minor one, and just going to talk about ADUs one more time. We're close to rolling out the program. One of the last remaining questions that we need input from City Council on are the fees on ADUs, specifically the impact fees. So state law says that if it's under 750 square feet or less, the city cannot charge impact fees for an ADU. If it's more than that, the city can charge them in proportion that the ADU is to the main house on square footage. So of our pre-designed ADUs, there are 8 of them, 5 are under 750 square feet, 3 are over, and we just want to get council direction on that. But I will say this, there's been a lot of interest from the public. Probably every other day we get a question about, when are they going to be ready? When are you going to be, holding your workshops and those kinds of things. So we're getting really, really close. What we definitely want to do is just manage expectations. And that is, hey, the plans are available. They are stamped by our building official, so they're available for you to use. But that's not the last step in the process. So you're still going to have to develop a site plan for the ADU. And then depending on the circumstances of the main house, there may be other requirements too, like sprinklers and things like that.
Right.
So that's one of the things we want to make sure when we prepare this package to give out to the public, that they understand all the steps. It's not just picking up ADU plans from the counter and handing them back to us, that there's more information that goes to that. So that's really what we're trying to wrap up here.
Okay, sounds good. Seeing nothing else, then going once, going twice, our meeting's adjourned.
Is it?
Yep.